Face front true believers, welcome back to Sentimental Elephants, a musical journey. I'm your host, Rob, and we are, as I promised, doubling back and going to the letter A. So, A is, as I mentioned before, for Afghan Whigs. Not this time, but I'm sure I'll get back to them. A is for Tori Amos. It's for The Adventures, and it's for Alice in Chains. But the band that I'm going to be focusing on this time out, A is for the Allman Brothers Band. Possibly the quintessential Southern rock band, although they never really cared for the term. One of the great guitar bands. Just go into their history a little bit. The Allman Brothers Band starts, of course, with the Allman Brothers, Dwayne and Greg Allman, both from Jacksonville, Florida. They played in some early bands in the 60s, the Allman Joys, Hourglass. Nothing much ever really came of those bands. But while Greg Allman chose to stay in California for a while, he had a record contract there, Dwayne moved back to the southern United States, and became a great, legendary session player. He played with all kinds of amazing people, much of them out of the Muscle Shoals studios. He played with Otis Rush, John Hammond Jr. He played with Wilson Pickett, Aretha Franklin, King Curtis. Got quite a reputation as a first-class guitar player. When he decided to form his own band, he had drummer on tap, J. Johnny Johnson, more widely known as J-Mo. Was very keen on landing a bass player named Barry Oakley from Chicago. Now, Barry was interested, but he also had a lot of loyalty to his existing band, particularly the band leader at the time, Dickie Betts, on guitar. Eventually, Dwayne Allman just decided, okay, fine, Dickie will be in the band too. And he managed to have two world-class guitar players in the band, because Dickie Betts is an amazing musician in his own right. Not only that, they also brought in Butch Trucks to be their drummer, along with J-Mo, so they would have a twin drummer lineup, which is something that wasn't particularly common at the time. Still isn't. It was really basically just kind of them and the Grateful Dead at that time. Now, there was a jam session in Jacksonville where everything just was firing on all cylinders. Little historical note, the keyboard player on that session was one Reese Winans, who wound up not being in the Allman Brothers Band when it founded. A bit of a what if there. If Reese Winans had stuck it out, hey, he might have ended up going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame too. Slightly earlier than he wound up eventually going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because he did later with Stevie Ray Vaughan, Double Trouble. But Dwayne knew that there was one person who was going to fill in that slot on keyboards, and most importantly on lead vocals. That was his little brother, Greg. Finally managed to persuade Greg to come back to the South. There we have it, the Allman Brothers Band. Just amazing chemistry for these six sort of very randomly sort of spread out kind of personalities. Formed an incredible unit. I love the fact that on the first album, on the keynote tracks, they just throw in one of the most odd time signatures for an intro with whipping post. It's like, I think it's 11/4. Is it dun 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 dun? I've been run down, I've been lied to. It's just magic. Came out right out of the box. Became one of the most sought after live bands. Just great performances. Did bills with Grateful Dead and Fleetwood Mac, and wound up having one of the greatest live albums of all time, Live at the Fillmore East. Sadly, soon after that album was certified gold, a tragedy hit when Dwayne Allman died in a motorcycle accident. There are doubly hit by tragedy about a year afterwards when Barry Oakley, their bass player, died in another motorcycle accident. There's been a lot of tragedy and a lot of controversy throughout their career, but they kept going. There were stops and starts, lots of changes in personnel. There was, highs and lows. There's some great periods, some kind of weak periods, but they just kept going all the way up until I believe it was 2014, which is the point that they've decided ultimately to put things to rest. Just wrap up that last wrap up the band having accomplished so much. Greg Allman, I think it was about a year or two so after that, he passed away from, I believe it was cancer, and Butch Trucks also passed away as well. So there's not really any chance of the band continuing. But there was a couple of years ago one sort of reunion concert under the name of the Brothers, where it was a lot of the members of the last lineup came together and put on one great performance in Madison Square Gardens in New York. That was actually one of the last concerts to happen before the big COVID pandemic caused everything to be shut down. So what's my story with the Allman Brothers? Well, my earliest knowledge of them as a child wasn't the greatest circumstances. I talked about a lot of controversy. One of those is there was a period in the mid-70s where Greg Allman was married to Cher, and a lot of sort of media attention around that. He wasn't in great shape at the time. I just knew about it because I knew who Sonny and Cher were, and okay, Cher's not with Sonny anymore. She's with this guy, Greg Allman, and he's this kind of blonde, very kind of blurry-looking rock star. So it was a bit of a media circus. It was not really about the music. I mean, I was a kid. I didn't really know that much about it. When I'm getting into my teens, I'm starting to explore rock music and music history more. I didn't really get much chance to hear about the Allman Brothers. I knew their history, but I didn't get that much chance to hear their actual music. But there's a bit of intrigue about them. They had a certain, pardon me while I scratch my nose again, a bit of mystique to them that I found kind of interesting. But I never really made the jump into full on tracking them down. The little bits that I'd heard sounded kind of intriguing, but I didn't really go all the way. It wasn't until like shortly after high school, wasn't directly through the Allman Brothers. My parents, who are awesome, gave me as a Christmas present something I'd asked for, which is the box set for the Derek and the Dominoes album, their one album, Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs. There was a box set which had the album, and then there was a couple of discs of sort of unreleased tracks and jam sessions and stuff like that. And I was intrigued by that, and I asked for that, and they gave that to me as a Christmas present. And that's where I'm hearing this Duane Allman guy. I didn't know going in that he was the other guitar player on the session along with Eric Clapton, but I certainly knew who Eric Clapton was. I knew the name Duane Allman, but I didn't really know much about them. But I'm finally hearing him, and just this these amazing solos and all this wonderful playing going on throughout this album. And at that point I'm really into longer instrumental tracks and listening to these jam sessions. It's like, wow, it's such incredible playing. And that pushed me over to starting to listening to the Allman Brothers themselves. And I got their Dreams boxed set, which covered a lot of their history with a lot of cool kind of hidden tracks. I did get Fillmore East, which is, as I say, it's a classic live album. I got their archival release of them playing at Ludlow Garage. And I did wind up getting one more contemporary live album. For some reason, me getting more into them just kind of stalled out for a bit. I'm not sure why. I just didn't, wound up not following that much further. I still love the stuff that I had of them. I just didn't get more deeper into their music. And this is a case of one of these bands where I had a few different waves of getting more and more into them. Because later in my late 20s, and at this time I'd met I met the woman who become my wife and later my ex-wife, and she was a bit more into Southern rock, and so she was, kind of more Allman's friendly. She knew some of their stuff. And I also discovered a band called Government Mule. Now, Government Mule was a band founded by, at the time, there were two members of the Allman Brothers. It was Warren Haynes on guitar and vocals, and Alan Woody on bass. And they'd formed a side project while they were still in the Allman Brothers, along with a drummer named Matt Abs, and they called Government Mule. And just kind of randomly, they had this sort of big live album, and it seemed kind of interesting to me. So I got that, and it was an amazing album, live with a little help from our friends, and I got the whole 4-disc version of it, and all sorts of incredible playing, and it got me not just into Government Mule, but also into bands that they'd covered on that, like I think they did some Humble Pie, and they did Free, and Little Feat, and that got me into those bands, and there's some guest musicians on it, like I think it was Jimmy Herring and Mark Ford, and that's where I first heard Derek Trucks, who I'd known about. He was soon to join the Allman Brothers. Thought, wow, like learning about these musicians, and by extension, it got me back into the Allman Brothers. So I started, getting more reacquainted and beyond the point that I'd already explored them, and I really, really enjoyed that. And I kind of, also at that point, that's when I was getting into jam bands. Now, the Allman Brothers didn't really care for the Southern rock label. They didn't really care for the jam bands label either. I think Greg Allman said, we're not a jam band, we're a band that jams. I'm not sure how exactly he's making that distinction, but I'm getting into the Grateful Dead and, Fish and Widespread Panic. And certainly the Allman Brothers, did fit in with that, even though they didn't think of themselves as a jam band. So I'm getting more into their, live recordings and just loving their performances. And I did a bit after that get my one and only chance to see them live, which was in 2002, I believe it was. It was that was the one show at that year of Blues Fest I was able to get to. But it was a great show. The only little complaint is that I think Warren Haynes was a little bit low in the mix. I could still hear him, but I couldn't hear him as clearly as I could hear Derek Trucks. And, I love Derek Trucks, but I want, there's Warren Haynes. I want to hear them both. But it was a wonderful show. And, that recharged my enthusiasm for the band. And as I say, this kind of comes in different waves. About a year or so ago, it went into a whole different level because it's COVID times, it's lockdown. I'm basically never leaving my house. I'm just doing a lot of work at home and listening to a lot of music, and I'm just needing something to keep my mind occupied. And I'm working a lot of overtime, so I'm able to indulge myself in getting more music. And realizing, oh wait, they've got a whole bunch of archival and sometimes it's a bit more contemporary released when the recording happened, but a lot of live material from the Allman Brothers that I did not have. So I got a whole bunch of them, got caught up to date, and lots of amazing concerts from many different eras, lots of different lineups. With great musicians all the way through. And again, my enthusiasm for the band got reinvigorated. So yeah, as I say, different waves of enjoyment for the band shows like I think I start out liking a band this much and that's much, and it can kick into another gear, and sometimes it'll kick into a whole third gear, and that's what happened with this particular band. So. I think I've hinted at this, but why am I great enthusiasm for this particular band? I think I can sum it up in a couple of different things. One, all respect to all the other amazing musicians in the band. but I love guitars. I'm still a guitar person, and don't get me wrong, I listen to a lot of jazz, listen to some electronic. I don't insist that something be, have guitars in it for music for me to enjoy it. I don't insist that something be rock, but I do love rock music. I hear a lot of talk these days, which I've heard throughout my life. It's people saying rock is dead, and there's not as much, maybe enthusiasm among younger listeners to rock music. I get it. There's maybe not that, quite as much excitement about it these days. To paraphrase Frank Zappa, rock is not dead. It just smells funny. But there's a lot of great rock music out there, and I'm still believing that the next great rock revolution can be just around the corner. The next thing that's going to get everybody really excited about it could just conceivably happen out of nowhere. But I just love guitars. I remember hearing in the 80s some synthesizer enthusiasts saying, I don't see why people are still into guitars. It's such a limited instrument. And I was thinking, I don't see that. It's such a wonderfully expressive instrument. I don't play guitar. I've taken a few lessons. They didn't really stick. I don't really have any gift for performing instrumental music. And I don't really understand, gear as much as a lot of other people do. I remember reading an anecdote where Duane Allman was asked, so you and Eric Clapton, which is playing which part? And he said, I forget which was which, but he said, well, one of us is playing the Fender and the other is playing the Gibson. And if you can tell which is which. It's like, well, I don't know if I can tell that. I mean, I can sort of distinguish individual playing styles, but I'm not particularly clued in on gear. But I still love it. I mean, I love that this is an instrument where you could have somebody as eloquent and expressive and as technically proficient as Alan Holdsworth, and you can have somebody as brutal and blunt force and powerful and just raw aggression like Steve Jones, and they're both great in different ways. And I love to listen to either of them. And so the Allman Brothers is possibly one of the ultimate guitar band. They've had so many amazing guitarists, and there've been other awesome bands that have had multiple lead players at the same time. Thin Lizzy, Wishbone Ash, Leonard Skinner. But the Allman Brothers, I mean, they started off having Duane Allman and Dickie Betts. And they ended their career with Warren Haynes and Derek Trucks. It's just not fair. It's like they're having so many guitar geniuses in the band throughout it, and during their career, they've had people like Dan Toller and Jack Pearson and Jimmy Herring all playing. They're all wonderful musicians in their own right. And you can just, if you're into guitars, you just pick any Allman Brothers album and you'll have this, wonderful guitar playing experience you get to listen to. As I say, all respect to the rest of the band. They had an amazing rhythm section. Greg Allman is one of the most incredible singers, just raw, soulful, gutsy voice. But as I say, if you love guitars, this is a great place to have guitars. And the other thing is, I have this weird thing where I just love bands with a sense of history. I love archival releases. There's been bands I've gotten into where it's like, I didn't go over the new stuff. I just started by buying some old archival releases of old live shows and started listening to those and getting into them that way. And there's so many of them from Allman Brothers. I mean, like I said, I got a whole bunch relatively recently, the past couple of years. I wish I could absorb them all. They've got relative to, say, other bands I'm into, like the Grateful Dead, or Frank Zappa, or King Crimson. I mean, this is relatively small potatoes. It's not as expansive, but they do have a fair number of really good live archival releases. And it's like you can just drop the metaphorical needle down. I don't know, I'm getting them on CDs, but I'm not really dropping a needle. But just drop down on any given show, and you just get transported. They've absorbed so many different styles. Is not, I think of Southern rock as being kind of one of those terms like progressive rock. People say, "Oh yeah, it's this," and they put it in a small box. It's like, no, all those those bands in the genre are very different, and the Allman Brothers were several different bands. They had rock, they had blues, they had country, they took in jazz. Dickie Betts was an amazing songwriter, composer of like instrumental tracks in memory of Elizabeth Reed or High Falls, Instrumental Illness, all these amazing tracks that he wrote. And this is a band that could take, as I say, songs like Whipping Post or You Don't Love Me, and just expand them out to nearly 20 minutes, and it's not it's not self-indulgent. It's like inspired solo after inspired solo, and it's always on fire and crackling and always interesting. So as I said, now side note, their studio albums, they're actually, there's a couple of lesser ones, like 2 or 3, but really their studio albums are actually quite consistently good, particularly the last 4 of the last run were all good in different ways. So you don't have to worry about, if you get a studio album, you're still in good hands. But it's really the live albums. I would recommend, if somebody was looking to get into it and you know what you're after, maybe start with Fillmore East, and also the album that came afterwards, which is right after Duane Allman passed, Eat a Peach. That's also a great album. It's a mix of live and studio tracks, and it's also, the studio tracks are a mix of some things they recorded with Duane before he passed and some other ones that they recorded afterwards. And all of those songs are really, really good. And there's a very good, strong songwriting. There was very good songwriting throughout. Pardon me. Throughout the Allman Brothers history. Sorry, some dust in the lungs. They weren't just a band that, it's like, okay, well, it's like a bunch of instrumental solos with nothing connecting to them. You can, Greg Allman wrote great lyrics. Midnight Riders, a wonderful, wonderful lyric. Ain't Wasting Time No More is another one as well. This is a band that really could kind of do it all, in my view. So yeah, if you now, sadly, it's too late to see the Allman Brothers as such live. But if you have a chance to see anybody who is in the band, either it's Dickie Betts with Great Southern, or JMO with his band, or Tedeschi Trucks band, which is Derek Trucks, with his wife Susan Tedeschi. I don't think I've raved enough about Derek Trucks. I think he's possibly our greatest living guitar player, and if you ever have a chance to see him live, I've gotten to see him live 3 times. He's always been just mind blowing. Or if you get a chance to see Government Mule, which I haven't yet, I'm very annoyed by that. But Government Mule with Warren Haynes, or anytime Warren Haynes shows up, he plays with pretty much everybody. He's probably playing somewhere right now. Do yourself a favor and take advantage of a chance to see these wonderful musicians live. You're definitely going to be in for a treat. So that's the Allman Brothers. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back on track with the letter C. Thank you for listening, and hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.